good evening once again. Happy Wednesday and happy spring. My name is Osa Osaige, and I'm the DIB director here at Carroll. Before we jump in to hear from our amazing speaker, I want to frame the next 90 minutes for you. Tonight's discussion will be recorded, and you're welcome to visit that presentation at any time. And in lieu of sharing the slides, we'll be sharing a one-page document that summarizes our conversation with some helpful resources. This is a webinar style presentation, meaning that the chat feature isn't accessible, but you can drop your questions into the Q&A, and all questions will be answered anonymously. We'll try our very best to get to all the questions, but should we not be able to get to them tonight, we're happy to connect with you offline. So, without further ado, I would love to introduce our amazing speaker, Sean Lare. Sean is a licensed clinical social worker who's passionate about serving the transgender and gender diverse community through his 20 years of experience providing services, leading advocacy work, and educating others on the varied experiences in this community. He's a psychotherapist, he consults with folks, he does presentations like this, he connects with different organizations and hospitals. Sean does it all, and we're so excited to honor and welcome him tonight. And he's going to be leading us in a really important conversation. So please be sure to drop your questions into the chat, and we look forward to hearing from Sean. Welcome, Sean.
Thank you. Thank you, Elsa, and thank you all for making the time to be here this evening. I am a parent of a 12-year-old. I wish I lived near you all and near this school community for many reasons. One, because I lived in the Boston area for many years and I miss Massachusetts so very much. And two, because my child has dyslexia and dysgraphia and ADHD, and I think could benefit from the Carroll School community. So I'm so excited to be here today to share with you how you can be supportive in your community, not only the school community, but where each of you live throughout Massachusetts in supporting trans and non-binary youth. My name is pronounced Sean Lare, as Osa said earlier, and I use he, him pronouns. Feel free to just call me Sean, and use the Q&A as things pop up. So wanting to share how we'll be spending our time this evening. We're going to spend some time getting an understanding of language and core concepts. And we're going to go over some practical tips for supporting youth. And to do that, I want to make sure that we have a equal foundation on how we're using terminology in speaking about and to trans people. I'm also going to have a little section on why this is so important that we're supporting youth and going over some statistics of the experiences of some youth in the US. And then lastly, give some very specific tips on how you can be affirming in interacting with trans and non-binary folks in your lives. I always like to also start off honoring so many people that came before us. There's a lot of false narratives in the media. It's only in very, very recent times that we're even portrayed more in the media, and seeing representation of trans people. And we've been around for many, 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 many generations for a long time. So I would not be here were it not for the many trans people before us. And I also like to uplift that a portion of being here today and the fees for this session are donated to lifting up other trans-led projects that support and celebrate trans and non-binary people and communities. It's a very important part of the work of trans-affirming training and consulting. I also want to honor that many people here today may have trans and non-binary people, folks in your lives. You may be exploring your gender, you may be trans or non-binary. And so sometimes attending trainings like this can have some uncomfortable experiences or cause some discomfort. So I invite you to participate as you can. Um, and I have these stars whenever we approach some slides that may include some content of microaggressions or suicide that may be a little bit more challenging for you to read about or experience. So keep an eye out for that. I also like to emphasize that when I share my own experiences as a trans person, and there's some videos that I'll be sharing of some trans youth and their experiences, that these are just a few examples that no one trans person's experience is representative of all of us. And, what I'm sharing today is definitely sort of just these common threads through, what we've learned in working with trans people and in research and in talking with trans people and as our experiences. And so these are some commonalities, and there's so much range in all of our experiences. And just like gender is only one aspect of our identities. And so all of that can influence our experiences of our gender and how we experience the world as trans people related to the culture that we grew up in, our socioeconomic status, our race, our ethnicity and faith. And also acknowledging that a lot of what we learn about trans people is inadequate and inaccurate, um, if at all. uh, I am 53 years old, and I grew up in Ohio, somewhat rural to suburban area of Ohio. And certainly knowing or learning about trans people wasn't within my view whatsoever. And the first time that I saw trans people represented in the media was on shows like Jerry Springer, or on Law and Order, or movies where a trans person was a criminal, was criminalized or victim of violence. So definitely is a very narrow and inaccurate view. And even how we learn about gender is very narrowly focused and depends on all those factors that I named earlier. So I think it's important to be mindful of that, and that it's okay to recognize all the things that we don't know or that we may be misinformed of. And so today's a chance to unlearn all that and fill in those gaps and move forward. And the foundations that I'm going to go forward with now, the terms and concepts, many of you may already be familiar with these terms and concepts. Some of them may be new to some of you. And as I mentioned earlier, my goal is to build a level foundation so that we're all using these terms in the same way. And for those who are familiar with some of these terms, may give you some thought on new ways of talking about gender and gender identity with other folks in your life as you share this information and continue your work on being supportive of trans and non-binary people in your lives and in your communities. So the components that I'm going to be talking about are sex, gender identity, gender expression, and orientation. First, talking about sex, or sex assigned at birth. So sex assigned at birth use the decision made of the sex marker on our birth certificate in the United States. And right now, in most places, there's male or female. There's a couple of jurisdictions that allow for X or to leave it blank in the United States. but it's primarily this binary of male or female. And it's based on one aspect of our sex traits. Our sex is the combination of our genitals, our reproductive organs, our chromosomes, our hormones, and yet that sex assigned at birth is typically made based on a visual assessment of one aspect of our sex traits. And that binary, those two choices, is a false construct that there is only two biological sexes. So thinking about to that previous slide of the combination of chromosomes and hormones and gonads and genitalia, that based on all that combination, you're either strictly male or female, is a false construct. When you look at all of the different combinations that medically we know about and scientifically we know about, we know that there's at least 30 plus variations of these combinations. 1 in 2,000 people born with visual genitalia differences. And as I mentioned before, that's only one aspect. There's many people whose variations are not known until they're in puberty, and their secondary sex traits don't develop as anticipated because of the hormone differences or combinations. Or when they go for family planning, they didn't realize that there was a difference in the chromosome and gonad configuration, or differences there, that affects their family planning. So what many doctors and scientists know is that this idea of two binary sexes, male, female, is not accurate. And we know that about 5% of intersex people are also trans or non-binary. And I name that specifically to say that intersex is not the same as being trans, and not all intersex people are trans. Some are, about 5% are. I'm not going to go in further. Um, and I encourage folks to go to this website, Interact. It's a great website and resource to find out additional information about intersex and advocating for intersex youth. So then moving on to gender identity, this is how we experience our gender. So if everyone here today kind of closes their eyes and think back as far as they can, and as I mentioned before, we're sort of put a lot of these gender messages and stereotypes on us from a young age. So if remove any gendered name we may have, or gendered toys we may have been given, or those messages, how did we know from that young age what our gender was? Some people may say, most people will say, well, I just knew. Some people may say it's based on the bathroom my parents took me into. And I would say, again, that's sort of a message. That was their assumption. But if you go to that, well, I just knew it wasn't something I questioned, that's because it was all congruent. It's just something that you know about who you are. It's how you experience yourself to be. For folks who are cisgender, these are folks whose gender identity matches their sex assigned at birth. So matches that label that is on their birth certificate. And transgender is a term to describe a person whose gender identity does not match their sex assigned at birth. And if you notice, we intentionally have adjective here. And that's a reminder that this is not a noun. When we talk about people and we're talking about people's identities, including their gender identity, whether they're transgender or cisgender, that these are adjectives to describe one aspect of who they are. For myself, I am white, I am middle-aged, I'm a social worker, I'm married, and I'm transgender. So it's one aspect of many parts of my identity. Non-binary is another term of one's gender identity where their gender identity is not match or neatly fit into man or woman. So it does not align with that sex assigned at birth and does not align with that binary. And some folks who are non-binary may also describe themselves as transgender in that uh, their gender identity does not align with their sex assigned at birth, and some may merely identify as non-binary. Another term that you may hear is agender, so someone who experiences having no gender identity, so not, um, doesn't specifically feel strongly aligned with any gender identity. So that's not to say that it's not within or between or among that binary or not, but just no gender at all. I've my best friend from college is agender, and there's someone that signed sex at birth was female and just has this experience of never really feeling aligned with women and women's spaces, just really felt like an outlier, and also absolutely doesn't feel like a man in any way or any spaces. And so came to this understanding of their identity as agender. So putting it all together, there are different terms that people may use to describe their gender identity. Um, the main information that I'd like you all to remember is when folks are cisgender, their gender identity aligns with their sex assigned at birth. And folks who are transgender and non-binary, their sex assigned at birth does not align with their gender identity. For folks who are transgender, they may align with that binary. So I identify as a transgender man, so a binary man who's transgender. And there are folks who identify as non-binary. So their gender identity is non-binary, does not align with their sex assigned at birth, and does not align with either binary male or female. The Williams Institute did a study and they released a report in 2022, pulling together a few different resources. They feel like they came better or closer to a population estimation, and they acknowledge that it's still not as accurate as it could be. They know that this is falling short, that there are more folks than what this represents, but this has come the closest from any study. That as of 2022, there were about 5.3 plus million transgender non-binary adults in the US, so about 1.6% of the US population. Um, and we'll talk on and off without getting too specific into each of the things going on, but I will talk in a moment about how some of what's going on politically is impacting the youth today. And I think one of the things that is important to note, especially when you think of how many youth or the impact on children, is that these attacks and how much space and cost it's taking up, um, that towards trans people and against trans youth, and considering it's 1.6% of the US population that they're targeting. Um, so given that percentage, when you look at the number of states with rights being at risk, it is about 1 out of 3 trans or non-binary youth whose rights are at risk, or about 5 over 500,000 adults. Gender expression is how we communicate our gender to the world, be it feminine, masculine, fluid, non-conforming. And even with some of those terms, if you think of feminine or masculine, I think different things come to people's minds. Um, when I'm working with people in my therapy practice that are exploring their gender identity, I get lots of answers when I talk about or ask this question of, what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? Do we have to choose? What does it mean to be both or neither? And then also talking about gender expression. What does masculine mean or feminine? And so the answers that people get, or that I get from folks, or answers that people give, can really vary. Um, and sometimes as people say them, they'll even note like, oh, well, actually, I know that that's a stereotype, or I know that that's something that I've just sort of been raised to believe, or message I've received. And for many of us, we've been taught that our expression needs to align with that, our gender identity, or even along with our sex assigned at birth. It kind of goes in order. We're given this marker on our birth certificate and expected then our gender identity to be a certain way, and then our gender expression to follow a certain way. And for some people, that's true. And we're gender conforming. Our gender expression does fit into that, some of those gender stereotypes of, if you are male, your gender identity is male, and your gender expression is more masculine. Or if your gender identity is female, your gender expression is more feminine. For other people, they may be gender nonconforming, where their expression does not fit into those traditional gender stereotypes. And there have been many folks throughout, even public actors and musicians and artists throughout our history that are gender nonconforming. And yet, when we get into our own communities and worlds, when it's our own family, our own neighbors, or someone, within our churches or our school community, sometimes then we think, oh, well, I've never known anyone who's been gender nonconforming. And so I encourage folks, if that's been you, to sort of take a pause and think through history of different examples of musicians and artists, like Prince or David Bowie, or Grace Jones, or Marlene Dietrich, um, who've been gender nonconforming in their expression. And a lot of folks who experience um, prejudice and discrimination, um, and even violence, often is based on one's perception of their perceived gender nonconformity. And we also often conflate sexuality and gender identity, and put a presumption of gender expression around each of those, or gender nonconformity around each of those. So there's a lot of anti-prejudice and homophobia roots in this perceived gender nonconformity. And I think it's also important to keep in mind a lot of the cultural bias that can be in some of that perception. And so for someone that may have painted nails, or may wear a skirt or makeup, or a certain type of clothing, may have less to do with gender nonconformity, and may have more to do with culture or some other aspect of their identity. So there is a relationship between our sex assigned at birth and our gender identity and gender expression. Um, and these are all separate aspects of who we are. And they can, work together, and they don't have to neatly align either. Completely separate, though, a different aspect of who we are is our orientation. So our sex assigned at birth, our gender identity, our gender expression, these are all within internally ourselves and our relationship with ourselves and who we know ourselves to be. And our orientation is about our relationship with other people. So it's about our desire to be in relationships with other people's, if anyone at all. So this can be sexual and or romantic, and those attractions may align or may be different. Some people's sexual attraction may be different than their romantic attraction. So romantic attraction being their emotional attraction or desire towards people compared to their physical attraction and desire. And there may be many terms for people's sexual and romantic attraction, and um, another sort of thing that a lot of folks that I've worked with have sort of done or can easily slip into when you're working with trans youth or students is to sort of revert back to some of those old messages and stereotypes of heteronormativity and this presumption of, okay, my child is telling me that he is a trans boy. So that must mean that he is going to be attracted to girls because boys are attracted to girls, and not giving this leeway for your child to also continue to explore their sexual and romantic attractions and orientations, and that those are a separate aspect of who we are. And for some people, their sexual and romantic orientation may shift when they are finally able to be who they are in their gender embodied self, because they have a better sense of who they are. And so they can be more present in their relationship with others and be more open to exploring their what they want in relationships and their orientations in relationships with other folks. And regardless of all the terms and people's identities and attractions, it's always important to remember that we don't have to fully understand someone's identity in order to respect or affirm them. So as we get towards the end of this evening, I'll give some specific tips on supporting people and affirming one another. And part of that is we don't need to ask everyone if if our child's friend comes over and shares that they're transgender, we don't need to know their full process of how they came to understand their gender identity. We don't need to know um, the meaning of all the terms that someone may use that are most affirming to them in order to respect them, understand who they are, use their pronouns, use their name, and be affirming. I'd like to pause just to ask my colleagues if we have any questions right now. Um, that would be good to answer regarding those terms.
Nothing as of right now, Sean, but folks, go ahead and drop questions if you have them. All right, seems like nothing's coming in the chat as of right now. So Sean, we'll throw it back to you.
Okay.
Mhm.
So now I'm going to go into some of the statistics of trans and non-binary youth. that I think really emphasize the importance of our support of the youth in our school communities, in our family, in our church communities, in our scouting communities, in our neighborhoods. So I have some information from a few studies um, emphasizing the importance of pronouns for youth whose pronouns were respected across all domains. There was significant reduction in depression and suicidality and attempts. We know that LGBTQ youth are um, much more highly represented in our homeless youth populations and as well as in our foster youth populations. And also, um, as I named before, of folks who are gender nonconforming in their experiences, that folks and youth, especially who are visibly gender nonconforming or perceived to be as gender nonconforming based on, uh, in one's community, how they are taught, what that gender conformity is, or those expectations may be that they are more likely to experience hostility and discrimination and denial of access or friendships um, and things of that nature. This is a map from the Williams Institute, and I mentioned some of their statistics before of overall population. This is specific to youth, different regions in the United States. And I think this is important in that there's often some misconceptions of where trans people live. So this is youth in the United States, about 1.4% of the youth in the United States are trans, or about 300,000. And looking at the races of each of those youth, again, I like to show this because there's also misconceptions around the race and ethnicity of transgender people. So of transgender youth in the US, um, this is the how they identify in terms of race and ethnicity. And I also like to always point out this is as of 2022, right? So it starts at the age of 13. So we know some people have aged up since then. And I also like to note that a few things. One, there are not more and more trans people in the United States or in the world. Um, I mentioned before that it's only been in the past 5, 6 years that we've been seeing more positive and realistic trans representation in the media, in our books, in films and stories. Um, so I think it's and as parents, how we're parenting as far as having more open conversations around gender and gender identity. There's more representation in cartoons even as well. And so I think that folks at a younger age are more able to access that language to have an understanding of why they feel different. I mentioned before my best friend always having that, feeling of being different in women's spaces and just not having the language for it. I did not have access to that language or understanding of myself as a transgender man. I didn't transition until my early 30s. Um, and looking back, I really always felt male, uh, as long as I can remember, feeling like a boy. I just didn't know that it was possible that I could live as myself until I was older. So depending on where you are and access, those can all influence the ages and stages at which we're able to come into the language and understanding of who we are. Um, this is specific to Massachusetts, so about 1.44% of youth in Massachusetts are trans or non-binary, which is about 5,900 of the youth in your state. And this is overall the population of trans folks. They didn't have for Massachusetts a breakdown of race and ethnicity. Um, I'm not sure why, based on how they're some of the data where they were collecting, I guess didn't collect that for each state. Um, I meant to go back. I apologize to point out the star on that previous slide. I'm just going to pause to note that that is on here. So these next few slides do talk about suicidality. So young people who had access to binders, shapewear being, for example, maybe a transgender girl wanting breast forms. Let's say binders are things that help compress a chest for a trans boy. Um, gender affirming clothing, all reported lower attempts of suicide and also lower suicidality. And we also see when youth in their schools have access to gender affirming spaces. So in this particular chart, it speaks to bathrooms. So an all use, all gender bathroom, um, almost half, not quite half, um, in terms of the impact on suicide attempts. Um, and this is true as well as access to locker rooms, access to sports, access to clubs. Really, what we're talking about is full participation in our schools, and we know how important for many kids things like sports and clubs can be, and activities um, can really be towards students' involvement in schools in order to get them engaged and keep them engaged. Particularly if, and I'm speaking from my own experience with my child, particularly if they are having challenges in certain subjects or academically, that it can be some of the other more social aspects or activities or sports that can keep them engaged in school when they otherwise wouldn't be. So to limit them and restrict them from those spaces can really have an impact on their mental health as well as their academic possibilities. Also, by the way, these statistics from these few slides are from the Trevor Project, and there will be information on the handout to get uh, to this as well. Um, so about every 2 years, they do a survey on the health of LGBTQ young people. So this is from 2024, from last year. So we know that using affirming pronouns are also important to youth. And um, again, about half of the people um, attempting suicide when their pronouns are being used and respected with the people that they live with. And we know when folks also attend schools where their pronouns and their names are used in schools as well. that makes a major impact. If you are someone that um, you get on the bus and everyone on the bus or the bus driver is using the wrong name, and then you enter the school and someone who greets you is using the wrong name and wrong pronouns, and then you sit in class and you're getting called on with the wrong name and wrong pronouns, very quickly one gets very anxious and depressed because you're not being seen. You're sitting there invisible, um, just wanting to just shrink. Just it's not just respect, it's not being seen. And that's a really hard place to be in, to try and sit and listen to a lesson or engage in it and learn. This shows where trans and non-binary young people across the US experienced affirming spaces, the highest place being online. So they're going out and finding affirming places, which is great, because they need to be affirmed, especially if they're not in other places. As a therapist, as someone that is, working to support youth, um, we have in my little diagnostic book, the DSM, this diagnosis called gender dysphoria. And when you look at the diagnostic criteria, there's nothing in there that says someone has to experience depression or anxiety. It talks about the stress around the incongruence of your gender identity and aspects of your body or how people see you. When I am working with someone who's trans and and if they are depressed or anxious, it is all because of the experiences of these spaces, of not having affirming spaces, um, of not having access to care that is causing or contributing to that depression or anxiety. So I love when I'm able to connect folks to online spaces, at least have somewhere where they're affirmed. And then hopefully working with the schools. I love that number is definitely every couple years that the Trevor Project does this gets higher, that more and more schools are affirming spaces. And when you think about the amount of time that students spend in school, I mean, these are their jobs. The amount of time we spend at work, they're spending at school and on schoolwork and school activities. I love that that's higher, which again makes a lot of these proposed laws against trans students so harmful, because as that number goes down, that's going to take away these affirming spaces for youth and really, really impact their mental health, um, their ability to attend school and be successful at school academically, be successful beyond school then in terms of employment or higher ed. And then they also included, since this was done last year, of the impact of recent politics on mental health. So this one statistics on the upper left was overall all LGBTQ plus young people. That's almost all, 90% negatively impacting their mental health. This was specifically asking about their mental health. And I know that the Trevor Project often releases statistics of like the day after the election, the day after inauguration, the day after each of these executive orders, these huge bumps in contacts of LGBTQ youth reaching out for help and feeling in crisis. 45% of young people's family considering moving to another state. And I know I would have a hard time in that, it's not something resources wise that my family could easily do. Um, and trying to find new jobs, getting licensed in another state and that whole process. And yet, like many of us, I will do anything for my child. Absolutely. Um, and I just can't imagine what these families are going through trying to make those decisions. And as I shared with Osa and Amy earlier, that you're likely to, maybe your kiddos and your school community, your neighbors, more and more will you may have more and more folks moving from these other states. I know that's been true. I'm in Maryland. Maryland, I have friends and colleagues in Massachusetts and some other states in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic area where people have been moving from these states where more and more um, anti-trans youth legislation have been passed. I did look up as well prior to this meeting, um, that, even within states that have passed legislation to protect trans people in their states, such as Massachusetts, currently in your state, there's five anti-trans bills. Four of them are anti-trans youth bills that have been introduced this legislative season. So right now they're in that phase of being introduced in your state. So all of those statistics, I hope really emphasize the importance of um, using someone's name and pronouns. When someone shares with you that they're trans and the name and pronouns that they use, how important it is to respect that. And if you are able to help someone access affirming spaces, um, how important that can be. Um, and if there's people in your lives where they're able to access gender affirming clothing and you can connect them to a thrift store, help them access binders. Um, the all of these little things really add up in terms of a young person's mental health to be the most successful that they can be. When I'm working with families in my private practice, um, and actually a parent also gives this example in a video, so in a little bit, that I think for most of us, when our little ones come into our lives and they're just these tiny humans, however they came into our lives, um, that we just want them to grow up and to be healthy and to have the best quality life they can, whatever that may be, that they're able to face life's challenges as they come, um, and experience happiness and love and joy. And when we support the kiddos in our lives, so using their names and pronouns, if we have trans children, that is what will help them do all those things. If we go back to that space of what we really want for our children, that is what will help them get there, and get them to be to that place of success as adults and to move out of our houses. Depending on the ages of your kids, that's also something then you start to aim for. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, there was a question that came in that wanted to know about like specific examples of how to be affirming to young people who are going through um gender identity exploration and Are there any like direct things that we can do to support them?
I love that. So they're exploring it and they're questioning their gender identity.
Or they're currently like know who they are and
Mhm.
maybe are gender diverse in that
Mhm.
regard.
Yeah. Um, if they are someone that is exploring, so someone that may say to you, "Hey, what I do know is I'm not this," then I would one, thank them for sharing that with you, and be an open support to explore that with them, depending on your relationship with them, right? A parent of a friend of a friend is different than a parent of your child, or someone who's a den leader of scouts, right? So depending on your relationship will, vary on access and what kind of support you'll show and engagement. Um, so it could be as simple as, hey, I can be someone if you want to try different names. Whenever I see you, if you want, whenever you're at our house hanging out, just tell me what name you want me to use, just so you can hear it, see how it sounds, see how it feels to have that name or those pronouns used for you. Or connecting them to resources. Um, I know there's a organization called Bagley, so Boston area gay lesbian youth. I know that they actually have sort of different things throughout Massachusetts. So connecting them with other folks to connect with in terms of peer support. Um, in the one of the handouts, I share some books that can be really helpful as well. Um, and even just sharing some of what you learned here of I understand that gender isn't so narrow. Like it can be um vast, and I'm here for whatever you need. Just let me know. I would say for someone that shares with you what they do know, if they share with you, hey, that birth certificate got it wrong. I'm not a boy, I'm a girl. Again, thanking them and asking them if they know what name and pronoun they want to use and start using it. And I'll share in a moment ways that you can practice doing that. If you are a parent or a neighbor, someone who's close that you interact with this young person often, it can be helpful to practice using that person's name and pronouns with someone else, like even in a story form. Just practice talking about that kiddo over and over again, using their name and pronouns so that you're getting it right.
Related to that, there was a question around like how do we actually ask people what their pronouns are? If there's like specific language that we should use.
Um, yes, and I'll share that, and we'll talk about how to practice that in a moment as well. Um, my pause is that sort of like many things, it depends on your situation. And one of my pauses because I'm aware that in addition to some parents, that there are some folks that at work that work at the school here this evening. So it sort of can be different if you are a parent and this is your child or a friend of your child that's coming over versus a teacher. Um, One thing is for if you are a teacher, if you are, you know, you have a bunch of kids at your house, or you're a den leader at Scouts, or you're a coach, I encourage that you introduce yourself using your pronouns as an invitation for others and not to demand everyone to. Or you could say, hey, everyone, let's go around, share your name and your pronouns too, if you're comfortable in that. Um, we are not yet at a place where everyone understands the importance of pronoun use and affirming trans people. And so what has inadvertently happened when different organizations have really insisted that people, or schools even have insisted people share their pronouns, is that some places have only done that if they think they visibly see a trans person in the room. So that student really feels on the spot. Um, and I think, and particularly in schools, when a young person is figuring out so many aspects of their identity, and again, my child is in sixth grade and middle school. Whew, so much going on and figuring stuff out. Um, that uh, if you are really in that stage of, well, shoot, I don't know, let alone, I don't want that person to know. I don't want that person to know. This person's my best friend. They already know. So there may be plenty reasons that someone isn't ready to share. So I do suggest that teachers especially be leaders and share their pronouns, um, wear buttons with their pronouns to um, really ensure that students know that they're a safe person to come and talk to share their pronouns with, but not to insist on it.
Thank you. Why don't we do one more and we'll keep digging in. There was a question around, for many folks, like folks don't want to say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, right? Because they don't want to cause harm. Shame comes with that as well. And so, like, how do we basically like normalize this journey of learning and, um, you know, really lean in into the work and at the same time also not kind of cause unnecessary harm to folks who are you know living through these experiences.
Mhm. One, coming to things like this and a lot of the resources that will be on both handouts. So going to books and trusted resources, trusted resources to learn more and more about trans people's experiences versus asking, especially a young person, to educate you about gender identity, about gender diversity, um, is, I think, key in the number one step. So that when you're with a young person who's trans or non-binary, your main focus is letting them be a kid. So whatever they've been doing, that's what you keep doing. Whatever your relationship has been with them, it's still that relationship. So there's not this giant shift or this giant um microscope or lens on them that's in a different way, but you're really just seeing them as you've always seen them. If this is someone in your family and let's say you have three kids in your family and each parent has some one-on-one time with each kid, that you continue that. Or if you have family game night, you continue that you kind of keep doing the things you always do as a family. And with that kiddo, what changes is what they've asked you to change. Um, and I would say, particularly if this is someone in your family, in terms of that access to care, don't be afraid to ask. I work with a 14-year-old now who 2 years ago shared that to their parents that they were trans, and they presumed, with the love and trust that they had in their parents, and their parents are very smart, they presumed their parents would be like, oh, okay, and that they would then find help and doctors and all this stuff. Um, if it was possible to be a girl. They shared that they want to be a girl. So, um, and now they sort of feel like they lost 2 years of their life because yes, they can be a girl and their parents are very supportive. They just were waiting for their, at the time, actually at the time 11-year-old, because they just turned 14, their 11-year-old to say, Mom, Dad, make an appointment with a doctor. 11-year-olds don't know that, right? Your kiddo may not know that there is such a thing as a pediatric endocrinologist that can prescribe puberty blockers to pause puberty while, all of you sort of figure out what they might need or want medically, but at least can help stop or pause the wrong puberty from starting because that can be so distressful. Um, or waiting for a young person to share their name or pronouns. So, or to share that they want a binder, to share that they want different clothes. So for some of that you wouldn't normally you wouldn't normally wait for your child to ask for, like going to a doctor, go ahead and ask. So if someone shares with you that they're trans, and it's someone in your family, asking them, okay, let's find out what's next, and finding a doctor to consult with, an affirming doctor to consult with, um, finding out if they want to go shopping, just like as any kid that outgrows their clothes, you would take them shopping. If someone is trans, they may have outgrown their clothes. It just may not have been size wise. So for that type of thing, don't be afraid to ask. Otherwise, just kind of keep things the same.
Thank you.
Mhm. I am going to skip ahead to this third, just to share a few different youth and families experiences.
I'm just a normal teenager and I'm figuring out what my normal is.
Jake Wagner, a rising ninth grader in Austin, Texas, came out as transgender in November of 2020. His process of both forming and forging his identity was a normal part of his adolescence. Much like Wednesday Gomez, a 10th grader also from Austin, Texas, whose views on gender and sexuality have also recently become more clear.
I'm non-binary, which means I'm not a boy or a girl, and I don't really identify with either of those things. I kind of everything and nothing at the same time. And yeah, that's kind of just always how I felt.
With a recent federal survey by the CDC showing that roughly 2% of high school students identify as transgender, teens and their families are learning the value of self-discovery.
I had a really hard time being able to be happy before I came out. I was sort of like, yeah, I am happy, but I'm not being myself and being happy at the same time, which felt really off for me. Even though I don't know a lot of things right now, as a younger person, I know who I am.
I came home one day to this beautiful note on my bed, and it just said, I've been trying to figure out some stuff, and I've figured out that my name is Jake, and I'm your son. I'm so grateful that he trusted us with his true self.
Jake just said, ask as many questions as you want, and it doesn't matter if you mess up as long as you're trying, then it's not hurtful.
Starting to call him Jake and all of that, it was just easy for me, just because if that's what he wants to do, then that's what he wants to do, and that's then I love him as Jake.
The process of coming out looks different for each person who goes through it.
Mentally, I've just been a lot happier because I feel like I've always tried to keep this in my own head, because I didn't really know what it was or how to explain it. But then when I came out, I was just okay, and I felt so much more mental freedom.
I've been feeling so much more connected to myself and represented in my life, and every time someone refers to me correctly, it just really helps me feel very much secure and grounded in my identity.
Despite the validation that comes from feeling known and accepted, these teens and their families still face challenges.
I was surprised at how hard it was for me. There was a little bit of grief there because it definitely felt like I wasn't the mother of a daughter anymore. I've always been so inclusive and so welcoming for people to be who they are. And I think when it's my own kid making this expression, it was harder for me to understand.
I am learning every day with this stuff because it's all an experience that I haven't gone through before. Wednesday has always been a teacher for us and has always led us through things in our life that we haven't had to face before.
With only 43% of trans teens reporting that they have an adult who they could turn to if they are sad or worried, more than half of the transgender youth population needs support, which starts with education.
A little bit after Jake came out, my mom was living with us. We were at dinner one night, and he came out with his laptop, and he gave us basically a little lecture, PowerPoint presentation about gender versus sexuality. That helped, I think, helped my mom a lot to understand all the nuances.
I think today's youth are really aware of the fact that they don't have to fit into a box, and they don't have to be a square peg in a circle anymore.
Even though they are still learning, families can model supportive behavior for others to follow, such as using gender-inclusive language, respecting pronouns, and avoiding dead naming, the use of the person's former name, to better create an open dialogue and promote acceptance.
Sometimes it's super easy, and sometimes it's not easy. Not because I'm not proud of Jake and happy for him and all that stuff. It's more because I worry that somebody will be not cool about it.
It's not about you. Your job is to show up and love your kid unconditionally. Your sweet baby is the same sweet baby that you always had and watched grow up. The transition doesn't undo or make them a different person.
Having a supportive community can give transitioning teens an open space to communicate and express what they need to feel safe.
I think it's important for everybody to express themselves and just live as the person that they want to be. And so I think that it's important to teach young people about gender identity and all that stuff so they can know, and then they can accept themselves.
It's okay to not know who you are, and you'll figure it out eventually. It's okay to try different labels. It's okay to try different things. And it's important to find people that you feel comfortable doing this around, people like you. And it's important to feel supported even if you aren't quite sure what you need to be supported in quite yet.
For the PBS NewsHour Student Reporting Labs, I'm
Sort of relative to the earlier question, just pointing out a few things that stood out to me. I don't know what stood out to some folks here. With what you can do to help and support. There was the example of Jake sort of bringing up this PowerPoint to grandma, and hey, that's not actually my favorite. A lot of youth do feel like that they need to be the teachers, and if someone shares with you that they're trans, I would recommend offering, let me know how I can help. If you want me to be there, if you want me to be the one to tell your parent, if you want me to one to tell your teachers, to tell whoever. So don't put the young person in the position like they have to call up Aunt Sally when they only see Aunt Sally every 2 years. So if this is someone in your family, offer to that person that you can be the one to share with family who they are, or to clubs that they're in, or to their coach or whoever. Just like in other aspects, if there was something else going on that was deeply personal or medical about that young person, you wouldn't put it on them to call up all these different people. So that's something else that I would offer to do in terms of support. And then the other 3 tips that we give folks is avoiding misgendering when you do, because you will, to apologize gracefully and do what you can to support people. And we've already been going over a few suggestions, so I'll give a few more. So using the affirming name and pronouns, sometimes it can be sort of helping someone else. So if you hear someone using the wrong pronoun, reminding them. And as you're reminding them, using it in a sentence. And it's not only saying it to get used to it, also hearing the new honorific, the new pronoun, the new relational term. So if this person is now your son, if this person is now someone's sibling, that you get used to that relational term. For some families, if it is taking months and months and months, uh, to me, that's a clue that they're not able to practice and that there's some type of barrier. So I recommend that they write out a sentence that uses their young one's name and pronouns and that new relational term. They write it out 20, 50 times, and then they read the sentence too, because all of those are different functions of how our brain understands information and can help sort of imprint it on our mind so that we're using those appropriately. And I gave you the example earlier about, if you can imagine a person sort of going throughout their day and being misgendered over and over and over again, how painful that can be. It's like a lot of little stings over and over and over again. So we want to really minimize that impact. And I'll go over apologizing in a moment. And because we will have times that we'll need to apologize and be mindful that our intent doesn't always equal our impact. So we want to minimize that impact. And understanding that when we're using that wrong pronoun, when the wrong name, the wrong relational term. So calling our kid our son instead of our daughter, or our daughter instead of our child, if they're non-binary, that it is a painful reminder that they really don't see you for who you are. And as a kid of any age, that can be really painful and hard, especially coming from a parent, someone that you really rely on and trust and is, the closest to you in terms of your family. On the flip side, I get the joy and experience of having worked with so many young people and families in my practice, of seeing kids' faces light up the first time they get a birthday card that says son or daughter. And it's just such an amazing experience to witness that they just see, feel that being seen and how amazing it is for them. I've gone over ways to practice. So using the name with someone else over and over again. Some families, well, being okay with other family members correcting you. Some people get defensive and you want to keep those defenses in check and remember that your goal is honoring and respecting and loving that young person. And then when you do mess up and make a mistake, to apologize and understand that, like, make a mental note, you're going to keep practicing and then move on. You don't want to make a big, like a big scene and make it about yourself. You want to understand that in that mistake, your intent of the conversation, that there's been this impact you didn't mean there. So if someone corrects you, to receive it as a gift and a reminder to keep practicing and to apologize and move on. So in the first one, they merely said, thank you. I'm sorry I did that. And here in this second version was the version I was saying about making a bigger, larger event of it. I can't believe I did it again. What was I thinking? I'm so sorry. I keep trying. So for families or neighbors or people in young people's lives that maybe have known them for a while, that is who I hear more often feeling defensive of. And we give so much leeway to those adults, right? Adults have power over us, especially if we're wanting or needing those affirming clothes or access to medical care. And they're the people that we trust and love the most. So there's this presumption that, oh, well, I understand Aunt so-and-so has, known me for the past 15 years. So of course they're going to mess up for 2 years. And 2 years is way too long, honestly. If Aunt so-and-so is really coming from that place of love and they really are practicing, they should be able to change. And age doesn't matter. I came out in my early 30s and I shared in a letter to my, at the time, aunt who was in her mid 70s. And she, without missing a beat, called me up and left a message on my answering machine. Said, "Hi, this is a message for Sean. This is your aunt. I got his letter. Thank you so much." And just right away got it. I truly believe when we center that love, we can, in practice, we can really do that, make that shift, regardless of how long, we've been using a name. The other way that we can support people is to offer to um, to be the one to stand up for someone and to correct or to reach out to someone when they have misgendered or use the wrong pronoun or wrong name for someone. So this is an example of someone, reaching out and reminding someone that a student uses a different name or different pronouns and how meaningful that was. They treat it like a gift. So if you hear someone being misgendered or the wrong name being used, be considerate or mindful of the situation you're in. So it may be in the moment or maybe privately later to check in and ask, hey, I noticed this thing. If that situation happened again, would it be helpful if I speak up for you? Knowing that, even if you hear that young person speaking up for themselves over and over again, which is awesome that they have that strength and ability to be a self-advocate, that can also be exhausting. And it can be so welcome to have so many, the more people in our lives that will do that for us, the better. The more we can, as I said before, just be a kid and just be ourselves. So checking in with the person of how you may intervene for them. So here's a few examples. And for the folks that work within the school setting, especially sort of taking if you, the student aside and asking, in front of the class, is there a way that you want me to say this or not say this? Because some students may say, oh my God, please don't make a big deal. Just correct them and move on, or just make sure, maybe even take that student that keeps misgendering them or using the wrong name and pull them aside. But by all means, don't make a big scene in front of the class. I don't want any more attention brought to me or this thing. So checking in with that student of how they would like you to handle if there's someone else in the classroom that is continuously using the wrong name or misgendering someone. So offering to be that support, and how can you make things easier for that person? um, Offering other people in your community to be that person that they can practice with. Have a practice buddy, whether it's someone else in your family, in your neighborhood, in your school, in your PTA, or whatever equivalent of that, that you can practice using those new name and pronouns with. I want to offer this last 7 minutes. I know I went through those last few ones quickly, and that is because these 3 tips of avoiding misgendering, apologize gracefully, and helping others is on the handout with those examples to remember how to do that. Do we have some additional questions that I can answer here, Osa?
Yes, thank you. There was a question about passing and what that means for what that can mean for people who are gender diverse.
Mhm. So the this term passing is a term that some people may use to describe um, sort of blending in or passing, like being seen as a cisgendered person. So not being seen as visibly trans, so that, you know, being trans is not the first thing someone says or sees about them or names who they are. Um, there's different times in people's lives where that can be very important, that they're the trans part of their identity and their experience as a person really takes a back seat and is part of so many aspects of their identity, and they allow other aspects of their identity to be more in the forefront, and that's important to them. So for many of us, if you reflect upon your own gender identity and how important it has or has not been to you in different settings, if it's been the first thing you've led with in every single setting or not. And if it has not, think about what that may be like if it was without your consent. Because for many of us, when we're trans, it is a very visible process, particularly if our gender expression changes, if our name changes, if our pronouns change, if our bodies change, that happens publicly in front of our peers. And so it can be a relief to have a period in our life where people aren't misgendering us, aren't making our gender identity the forefront of who we are, and they see us for us. They just see us as another teenage boy, another teenage girl, another teenage person, rather than just right away that transgender with a big T on our chest. I just to add another term that people may use related to that is stealth. So those are sort of hand in hand, this idea of just having our transness take a back seat, be quiet for a while, and just let me be seen as me.
Thank you. We probably have time for one more question. And um, like if folks want to learn more, where should they go?
You can reach out to me, and certainly reach out here at transaffirming.co. Um, There's a lot of great resources on the handout of websites to go for learning more. I have books as well that I recommend, that are both sort of generally learning more about trans people and a lot of this type of information. Um, and also, um, if they continue to email questions to you, if there's certain themes that maybe there's resources that aren't on that list, and we see those themes, I can provide additional resources that can address those.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you again, Sean, for sharing your insights and your story with us. We're so grateful. And thank you for everyone who joined us today in the conversation. We really appreciate your questions and your energy. And we look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much for being here.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Have a good night. We will be sure to share the resources after the session.